Good morning. My name is Janet Lambert. I'm the CEO of the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine. And thanks to everyone for joining us today for the latest webinar in a series of webinars we're holding. This webinar focused on the next wave of commercial development in cell and gene therapy and tissue engineering. Before we get started, and as folks join, I'd like to give folks a little bit of an overview of the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine. ARM is an international advocacy organization dedicated to realizing the promise of safe and effective regenerative medicines for patients around the world. In our lexicon, regenerative medicine is cell and gene therapy and tissue engineering. We have more than 350 member organizations from around the world in more than 25 countries. And our members are small and large companies, nonprofit research institutions, patient organizations, and other stakeholders who are invested in the success of regenerative medicine. We focus on trying to achieve clear and predictable regulatory pathways, effective and value-based reimbursement policies, addressing the industrialization and manufacturing hurdles that are unique to regenerative medicine, and we compile unique sector data and use it to educate the media and other stakeholders about what's going on in our field. ARM provides a number of resources, both to our members and to the public. This webinar series is one piece of that. And if you are interested in seeing what other webinars we've held, they're all recorded and available at our website, as this webinar will be by tomorrow. We provide a number of reports on the clinical development and the financial developments of the sector on our website. There's a video library there of conversations with leading thought leaders in the sector, like the folks we'll hear from today. And we have a sector newsletter that is free to anyone who's interested, and on a weekly basis rounds up the key policy, business, clinical, and financial news in the sector. As I mentioned, we're going to focus today on the next wave of commercial development in our sector. And so I wanted to give you, just as a starting point, an overview of some of the expected near-term product approvals. I won't go through these in any detail. They'll be available to you after the webinar. But I just wanted to point out that you can see that they range from gene therapy, cell therapy, gene-modified cell therapy, and tissue engineering. They cover a variety of geographies, as well as a variety of indications. We know, of course, that the pipeline of cell and gene therapies is quite rich. And so while these are those publicly announced filings, we know that there are a number of other products in development, and that it's really early days in this sector. Really only a limited number of products have come to market so far. And what we want to learn from our guest today about is kind of what are the lessons that we've learned from those pioneers, and how is it shaping the plans of those who are in the pipeline thereafter. So in order to discuss those and other topics, we have a terrific panel today. I'm so pleased that Chris Vann, who's the SVP and Chief Operating Officer of Autlos, has agreed to be the moderator today. In addition to his role at Autlos, Chris is a member of the ARM Board of Directors and has been a terrific director for us. I'm going to hand it over to Chris, and he'll in turn allow our other panelists, Eric Mosbrooker from Audentes and Alison Finger from Bluebird, to introduce themselves. Just to give you a sense of the agenda here, I've spent 5 minutes on this welcome and introduction. I'm going to hand it over to Chris. He'll lead a discussion of approximately 30 minutes with the panelists, and then we'll open it up for audience Q&A. I would ask the folks on the line, if you would like to ask a question, please don't use the chat function, but rather use the Q&A function in Zoom. We won't be pulling questions off the chat. With that, I'm gonna stop my screen share and turn it back to Chris. Chris, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Janet. And I would like to actually recognize and thank ARM for putting together such a very interesting program of activities over the summer, and to all the people behind the scenes who make these meetings possible. Today, we've got the great fortune to actually discuss the next wave of commercialization. And with me, I have an esteemed panel. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to pass over to my colleagues to introduce themselves, and perhaps ladies first. Alison, if you'd like to introduce yourself and your current responsibilities.
Yes, of course. And thank you. First of all, thank you for having me here. And I'm really happy to join this panel and join in this discussion, because it is fascinating. So I am Alison Finger. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Bluebird Bio, and Bluebird Bio is a cell and gene therapy company. We have indications from severe genetic diseases like cerebral adrenoleukodystrophy to hematologic disorders like thalassemia and sickle cell. And then we also have an oncology cell therapy business as well, and which we are partnered for our first step with Bristol Myers Squibb for ide-cel for multiple myeloma. So very excited to be working on the commercialization of all those. We are approved in Europe with Zynteglo, which is for thalassemia, for transfusion-dependent thalassemia, and are working on our submissions for the United States. So a lot going on at Bluebird, a lot to talk about. It's been a fascinating journey so far, and I'm so excited for the future as well. So that's me.
Thank you, Alison. Eric, would you like to give an introduction yourself?
Yes, thanks, Chris, and thank you, Janet. We get to see your picture, and I'll share sympathy for your accident. Hopefully, you're going to have a quick recovery. But thank you for ARM and for Chris for allowing Audentes and myself to participate as well. Audentes is, as of January 15th, and now an Autlos company with the same mission previously, which is to take AAV-based genetic medicines in rare neuromuscular diseases, initially X-linked myotubular myopathy, to market. My role is actually Chief Commercial Officer, not Chief Operating Officer, but I'm responsible for the launch of the product worldwide. And for us, we have Zolgensma in the neuromuscular space, in the same centers, some of the same employees, so lots of overlap. So we're eager to talk about things that we've learned from that launch specifically, and obviously other cell and gene therapy launches.
Great, thank you. And last, I'm Christopher Vann. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Autlos. And within Autlos, I have a variety of roles. Apart from general management, I have specific responsibility for commercialization. So I'm the lead commercialization person inside the company. I'm responsible for project management. And perhaps because we are actually a cell and gene therapy, I'm also responsible for all of the IT and systems around the interface with the customer. And we can discuss why that is if you want as part of the panel discussion later. Obviously, Janet mentioned that we're in a great situation. Patients are actually beginning to realize the benefits of cell and gene therapy in a variety of ways, in a variety of different approaches. And all of the companies that are represented here today have one thing in common, which is we're actually the next wave of companies commercializing products. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to start perhaps by, asking my colleagues. We're going to benefit from the presence of the first companies on the market. What do you think are the successes that we can build upon? And then I'll also ask, what do you think is still to be done in terms of building the market? And perhaps we start with Alison.
Sure. It's a fascinating journey to watch and to participate in. And I think that, it's learnings from what we've seen with other products, but also sort of us being in there in the mix, trying to figure things out as they come to markets too. And as you said, the treatment centers where we're looking have experience across the range of cell and gene therapies. Many of them do. And so understanding what needs to happen, the learning comes from both those perspectives. And I think for me, one of the things that is most striking is that the effort really has to be what I call surround sound, right? And that it's more about making it work than typically driving demand, because with the cell and gene therapies, the clinical outcomes are just wonderful, and what everybody wants to be able to bring to their patients. The question is how you bring it to patients. So it's not a typical launch of driving demand. It's about figuring out how to make it work, and making it work not just for the company that you work for, but for all the participants in the total care system. And so, Chris, when you said that you have IT and those functions reporting into you as well, you know, we have IT people in Europe who are absolutely customer facing as we set everything up so that the patients can be enrolled and drug product can be manufactured, and of course the care can be delivered back to them. So making sure that and just understanding how people are making it work from commercial through supply chain, and then also things that are going on from the payer environment and the policy environment, the activities that need to happen. You know, what we're doing is truly disruptive. Disruptive is a word that's used all the time. It is an exciting word, but it takes a lot of work to make the disruption happen and then make everything land the way it needs to the benefit of patients and their care teams. And so those are, I think those are some of the most extraordinary learnings from seeing what's come before, and also understanding what we need to do as we get into the mix as well.
Thank you. Eric?
Yeah, and actually that's I'll tack on to disruption, because I think that's a key theme here, Alison. Everything is different, right? So for us, as we look again, as Zolgensma, but also of course the excellent work that Alison is doing. And by the way, you're probably not going to promote it yourself, so I do want to promote the Gene Home, your phenomenal technology and disease education site that's up. Everyone should check that out. It's really fantastic. Congratulations on that. So one of our mentors and one of the people that we follow is on this call. So I think you know, as Alison said, and to dig in a little bit deeper on the payer side, so outcomes-based agreements, which were really a hassle in ultra rare disease and really not used in ultra rare disease when there were chronic therapies, we're seeing those evolve. But we're also seeing the entire patient dynamic change as well. So crowdfunding, for example, I think gives a completely different flavor to a launch where you don't know where your first sale in Europe is going to be. It might be in Portugal, it might be in Slovenia. And so your supply chain needs to be flexible and adaptable so that you can account for that. And then I think the outside of policy, of course, as well, is having a center-based strategy. So, you know, as Alison said, the outcomes are really quite striking in these therapies. There is a question, of course, that the payers are going to have and beat us all up on durability until we have more and more data. But you know, in terms of the way you launch and the way you build a commercial organization, the way you have salespeople, you know, we're looking at having, again, something similar to Bluebird, where you have an account-based strategy where you're really focused on a multiple call point at the center. So, you know, who's going to be in the hood moving vials into bags, who's going to be, who's the CFO, who's going to be responsible for the significant financials behind these therapies. So it's really changed everything, I would say, in the way you launch.
Okay, thank you. So my colleagues picked up on, I think, a couple of important themes. I think all of us actually feel that we're launching into a market which is far from established. Many of the activities are still not routine. It's a very customer-centric relationship. It's a collaborative approach that's needed to deliver patient care. And I think you know, if you move into that kind of environment, one of the things about being a disruptive therapy is you're going to have to bring the solutions not just to the product, as Alison said, but it's going to be also very important to understand various aspects of what makes the treatment successful and participate in helping to come to solutions to those areas. I think you know, the other thing we can discuss at the end, I don't think any of us particularly feels disadvantaged by being a second mover. But, you know, one of the things that we will actually obviously do is that we will both benefit, but also share in some of the pain of the companies that went before us. So what I'd like to do in the next part of the discussion is perhaps start unpicking some of those specific aspects that make cell therapy so rewarding and also so challenging. And maybe we'll start with the patient journey. I think one of the interesting things about the relationship we have in delivering a cell therapy is that we follow the patient and we support the patient along much more steps of the journey. So maybe I'll start with Eric. But Eric, what I'd like to ask you is, you know, you're in an ultra orphan kind of area. You know, what do you think you can do in order to help the patients along that journey? Which do you think are going to be the very important steps? And then once they've received the treatment, actually monitoring them beyond that. What do you think are the particular challenges for cell and gene therapy?
Yeah, and it's a great question. Thank you. So, you know, this is an area where, as you said, we can build on the ultra rare space and things that we have done so far. I think that the biggest change overall is that for a one and done therapy, the patient now has their therapy. The patient's not involved perhaps in a monthly refill fight with their payer or engaged in getting access to a chronic therapy. So if they see the outcomes that we've seen and we hope to provide, their motivation to go to a center, for example, to go do a motor milestone check-in is not quite the same. And so I think one of the things that we've seen and we continue to follow is in the contracting process, who's responsible for monitoring the outcomes. I think prior to treatment, though, to step back a little bit, so there are going to be less centers, right? And not all centers are going to want to take on the complexities of handling gene therapies and the financials of gene therapy. So there's going to be travel and logistics. There's probably going to be multiple visits to the site because they need to obviously get pre-screened for antibodies and other, depending on the therapy, other functional tests. So I think there's a lot of travel support up front. There's a lot, and again, Alison's site does, she did not pay me to do this, but her site does a great job, I think, in demystifying what gene therapy is. But there's a lot of education that needs to happen. And, you know, this is very kind of new, magical kind of therapy. What does it mean for people? How are they going to feel afterwards? What are the first 24 hours like? But the monitoring then, I think, is really going to be something that we'll have to figure out because it's going to happen out in secondary and tertiary centers. Again, I don't expect that the patients are going to continue to go to the centers of excellence. So our patients, for example, if they have been able to take their tube out and get off of a vent, they can answer that question in a phone call. They don't really need to go into the office to demonstrate that. So we're seeing quite a lot of differences there, and of course none of that speaks to how involved the patients and patient advocacy are in the development process initially.
Is it an area where you're going to be using technology, or is it mainly going to be through established connections through things like patient groups?
Yeah, we expect and believe quite firmly that this is going to be a patient services and access type of model. So yeah, we would expect to rely heavily on patient services. And every launch is different. So XLNTM is 1 in 40 to 1 in 50,000 live births. So if you do that math, that's in the hundreds of patients. So there's no standard of care. There's only so much you're going to build out for a patient population that size, whereas patient services can be involved probably in all the families that are getting treated at those kind of numbers. So we would expect to have a more hands-on approach there. And that might change if we get into Pompe and Duchenne and other diseases.
Okay, thank you. And Alison, you're the lucky one. You're actually launching into several indications at the same time. So maybe picking up on that theme, what's similar and what's different?
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank Eric for the shout out to the team and what they did on Genome. It's Gene Home and just launched, and the team did a great job on all of that. It is product agnostic, and it starts with the first issue, which is education, right? Having people really understand what gene and cell therapy is and what it's not. And making sure when we focus on commercialization, what we want to do, our objective is to make sure that everybody has all the correct information they need to make good decisions for themselves. And that can be for the patient, it can be for the care team, it can be for parents and spouses or whomever, right? But we want to make sure that people are really well informed, good, bad, great, ugly, whatever, so that people can make good decisions for themselves. And that's what it's all about. So it starts with education and supporting the patients. And when we think about it sort of in three buckets, right? The first is what we call enroll to infuse, but it's how patients come into the system and what happens to them during that process. What are the points and the questions that they have, or the care team has, or that they want to be sharing with patients. And so that's where education comes in and support. Then patients who have decided that they do want to pursue the therapy and are appropriate for the therapy and are reimbursed and everything, thinking through what needs to happen to help them get through therapy, right? And again, that's looking at who all the stakeholders are and the whole care team that surrounds the patient. So it's the patient journey, but then also looking at the people who are working with the patients, who are using gene therapy or cell therapy. And we often take a moment and stop and think about what our medicines mean for those providers as well, right? Because it's changing their lives too. And so sort of thinking about it, what's in it for me from the provider standpoint, not just what the providers can do for us, but importantly, these are people who have passion and conviction about what they want to do for their patients and the people they care for. And so how do we work with them? Also, when you think about it within an institution, they've got processes that they use to support patients through a stem cell transplant. And so we don't try and override any of that or get in the way for any of that, but we want to understand it. So if there are places where we can support and be a step back, but lend resources or support to them as appropriate, we will. But I think first and foremost, it's about the care team and the patient and understanding what's going on there, and not about Bluebird and not about our products, right? It's about that care. And then the last part is the follow-up. So they've gone through therapy. For all of us, I think we're going to have the need to be able to demonstrate what the long-term implications of our therapies are. And we have an obligation now in Europe, and we anticipate it in the US as well, of providing long-term data of what happens to these patients post-therapy. And so making sure the systems are set up for that. There's a lot of work that's going on across organizations to get it set up. So maybe with the industrialization of more cell and gene therapies, this will become, the infrastructure will be well established and in place for this to happen. But it's not all there yet. And a lot of the registries aren't fit for purpose for what is needed for these long-term follow-ups. So making sure that that is in place, can be in place, as we come to market is critically important as well. So again, it's this surround sound, everybody working together, but not always thinking about things from the company standpoint, but of course, first and foremost, thinking about it from the patient standpoint, but all the other stakeholders as well, because they're all working hard to make this happen too.
So Alison, you bridge beautifully into the next question. So let me pose it to you. Obviously, one of the features of this market and this type of marketing is it's a team sport, and collaboration is really critical. So what do you think are the particular opportunities that we have to operate in a different way, maybe to conventional pharma, and where do you see the challenges?
I think it's a really basic thing to say, but it's something that we talk about a lot at Bluebird. It's not about partnering with an institution. It's about partnering with the people, right? And so when we think about a qualified treatment center that we are working with, it's not just the name on the door, it's the people inside the building and what they're doing and how they work and what they want to do. And getting an understanding of all of that and figuring out how we fit in. And I think that's really what's critically important for us to do. And I think people are doing it across the board, right? But but to me, that is a little bit different, because a lot of times I've been in pharma for way too many years to admit. But a lot of it's like, who are the stakeholders and what can they do for us? But it's not about that. It's about how we partner, how we collaborate, and who these people are as people. And as I said before, what cell and gene therapy means to them and their career. We had a thought leader who was sharing with us that, you know, we asked people what their bluebird day is, right? And he was talking about the promise of gene therapy for the patients he treats. And he said, I hope that, you know, by the time I'm ready to retire, you and other companies will have helped us take care of all these patients so that I can retire, you know, a happy man who's done my job. And that was really, I mean, super powerful and amazing. And I think that's what you have to remember, is that it's all people working together, not institutions necessarily.
I agree. And you know, I actually came to Autlos by mistake, I always tell people, because obviously I knew a board member who'd worked with me in Roche. I was in Roche Oncology for 25 years. And so they hired me without realizing I'd actually spent 3 years building a US transplant business for Roche. In actual fact, I think the closest thing I probably worked in the field is actually the transplant business, because again, you follow the patients before the treatment, during the treatment, and after the treatment. Eric, from your side, is you know, in the areas that you're operating, you know, how critical and how different is the relationship that you have with the centers and other key stakeholders?
Yeah, I think from a center perspective, Alison covered it really well. It's about a long-term relationship with not only the center, but the patients and the families that are being treated there. So we're also looking at that as a long-term relationship that starts in many cases during development or publications or other kind of medical and scientific aspects of the relationships prior to launch, and then continuing on throughout launch. I think some of the partnerships that are challenging, if you come from a big pharma perspective, are actually internal, and kind of the medical affairs, patient advocacy, commercial relationships, what you're allowed to do, what's acceptable to do in an ultra rare population. So I think those are a little bit trickier. And then of course the payer relationships, you know, in terms of external relationships, are key and are developed years ahead of launch. Yeah.
No, and you know, you bring us on to one of those other sticky topics actually very nicely. The two of you do all my work for me, which is, you know, one of the things that's very unique is payers are used to paying a small amount of money for a very long period of time, not necessarily for good benefits, but they don't necessarily see the impact of that cost. I think we're all working in an area where, you know, there is a one and done generally cost. It may be different when we start talking about allogeneic products, which is quite a high sticker shock type price. So what have been your specific challenges in reimbursement? And Eric, maybe start with you. And for those people who may not have the same reach across the world, you know, where are they different in US versus Europe?
Yeah, and Alison will be able to comment much more recently on Europe than I can. But I think for us, it's about you know, early engagement. So, you know, the main challenge when it comes down to it, yes, there is sticker shock around the price. I think we all believe there's tremendous value even at the 7-figure price points. However, payers may need to join us in that understanding. I think the main thing is, you know, again, it's a new therapy. Even in some of the more advanced areas, you've only got 8-10 years of durability data. So sharing the risk, I think, of the outcome is really key to payers everywhere. And what we've done is taken advantage of the nice early scientific advice process so that we can really have a good framework for an ex-US HTA model, and then started to engage with payers and with ICER in the US. Again, not that those will all be positive outcomes and we'll all be singing the same tune afterwards, but, you know, at least engaging initially and understanding the framework, making sure that we have a clear value proposition that we can communicate through our clinical development program and our data, and then eventually our label.
I can ask you if you've had the same experience as we've had. I would say one thing that's slightly different here, despite the high prices of the product, there is a willingness and a desire on the part of the payers to try to find a way to make these products accessible. Would you agree, or is that too general a statement?
No, absolutely. I think that, again, this is tapping into the Avexis and Zolgensma example more so in the US and in Europe. You're seeing crowdfunding, you're seeing self-funding a little bit. Primarily what we've seen is that the larger payers understand this, are able to do it. A smaller plan, though, is not going to have the same financials and same outlook. And then, of course, we are going to be heavy on Medicaid and XLMTM. So Medicaid in the US is going to be quite a challenge, I think, in some of the states. And that's one area that I don't know if this is your next question to tee up again, but obviously on the policy side, we need coverage for some of the innovative contracting things we want to do around best price. But I'm sure you'll get there at some point. But we'll, those are the main themes that we're seeing right now. But yeah, I think people understand and are see the benefit, see the tremendous outcomes, and are willing to partner with us.
Great. And Alison, yes, you do have the most recent experience. So would you like to share your most recent experience? How problematic is it to get secure pricing, and what do you think could be the improvements we could make as an industry and with the payers in collaboration?
Yeah, so it's certainly a bit of a bumpy road, but I think it is a road that people are coming along with us. And I just want to first underline a couple of things that Eric said, because I thought that was a great overview and response. I think I think most people, well, maybe they don't, but our strategy for reimbursement is to really pursue risk sharing with payers, and also looking at how to think about this one and done therapy. What we've instituted is a policy for value-based payment over time, where we're putting the reimbursement at risk, up to 80% at risk, so that we split the payment for the product over 5 years, capped at 5 years, and we only get paid after the first payment if the product actually works and is successful. It is, and we try and keep it simple, right, and easily understood. So, for example, our primary endpoint for thalassemia is transfusion independence. It's pretty easy to track whether a patient needed transfusions or not over the course of a year, and then instituting that with payers. From, as Eric said, engage early. From Europe to the US, we've done that. And there is a lot of appetite and ambition to get this done. Where the bumps come are just in kind of the small script in how to get it done. And when you get into it market by market, this is very different from the way things have been done before. Things have been legislated before. Eric noted best price in the United States, and there's work going on that and movement on that, which is great. But it's small things that you kind of have to keep solving for when you get into it. We executed our first contracts with sick funds in Germany at the end of last year. We've been working on continuing to progress that through other sick funds and the smaller sick funds in Germany. Of course, COVID hit, and that put a lot of stuff on hold when people couldn't talk to us or were otherwise engaged with trying to deal with a global pandemic. But aside from the global pandemic, the engagement continues, and just making it happen. There is a way forward, there is a path forward, but you have to figure it out payer by payer on how to make it work. But as Eric said, people really want these outcomes. They understand and they appreciate putting risk on the table and sharing risk. And so it's a matter of perseverance to work through all the issues, more big and small, but mostly small, that just have to get sorted out. And that you need a team that is highly resilient and focused and very engaged and collaborative with the payers. So, oh, and one other thing I just wanted to say was what Eric said in the beginning was with these value-based agreements, one of the things that we did at Bluebird, which I was really thrilled when we did it, and I'm thrilled every day since, is that we invested early in the capability for value demonstration. Because we have great clinical outcomes for our products, but we have limited data sets, and making sure, and a lot of the diseases that we're working on don't have a lot of necessarily natural history data out there the way that you want it to be, so that you have all the evidence for your models and things. And so we made sure that we had the capabilities in-house and also worked with people externally to shore up our natural history and the evidence that we need to surround our clinical data, so that we have the right package of information for payers, so they have all the information that they need to make good decisions.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that we're learning is the devil is very much in the detail, and different solutions will be needed in different markets. Obviously, I'm a UK-based company, so we have a reason to actually discuss with European authorities, just because we're based there, people like NICE, HAS, and others. I think that the other important thing is that there are changes afoot. I think, you know, to call out again something that ARM have been instrumental in supporting, the DRG for CAR T-cell therapy is a really important advance. But it would be fair to say that these things don't happen overnight. And so that early planning, that early engagement, I think, is going to be really, really key. We've touched upon a lot of areas, but I know that there's going to be people in the audience who you know, we're a year and a half, 2 years behind the leaders. There's people who are 1 year to 2 years behind us. You know, if you were actually about to embark, you're about to go entry into man-type stage for your products now. For future manufacturers, what would be your number one piece of advice? What do you think is the most important thing that they need to be considering if they're thinking about commercializing a product and they're at the research stage? So maybe we go with Eric first, and then Alison.
Yeah, thank you. And you know, I think we've touched on some of this already. Obviously, I'll put aside the huge complexity of actually the clinical development part of it, because that is clearly the most important, is demonstrating the outcome in patients. But you know, building on what Alison said, I think that one of the things that my predecessors did a phenomenal job on at Audentes was building the natural history study and story prior to getting too far into the clinic. So in terms of putting together your value proposition and demonstrating that value and telling the story, it's been invaluable to us that we had both Recensus, which was a registry study, and then Inceptus, which was a run-in study to the actual Aspiro clinical study. So that's been huge for us in terms of communicating the value, building that value evidence story. There are obviously many, many other things in terms of CMC and other ways you can demonstrate value. But I think that the natural history for us and having that comparison, given again in our patient population, we don't have a randomized, you know, phase 3 study. It's not going to be that kind of regulatory interaction. So that's what I would focus on, is getting that value evidence story and the commercial perspective in as early as possible.
Alison?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think start early, right? And understand the landscape, understand not only the disease, but how these institutions work and what needs to happen, just to, you know, from demand through supply chain through follow-up, right? Understand that journey, what's happening now, what needs to happen in the future. And I would say, use all the resources available to you, including, for example, ARM, right? And so with everything that needs to happen to build this ecosystem, and with the changes that are happening across the industry and across all our companies, and with the payers and with the institutions, you know, I think we're all in this together. One of the things I think is really fascinating to watch, that we have conversations about, is how the industry, the hospital and the care industry is going to be changing with the advent of all these products coming to market. So it's not just about the payers, it's not just about us, but it's also, you know, what are they going to be doing to ensure capacity and to make sure that they can actually leverage and use our products in the way that they want to. So, you know, it's the industrialization that Janet talked about in the beginning. I think that is really fascinating, and certainly resources like ARM are terrific for people to collaborate to make sure that these changes happen. But for your own individual product and commercialization, I'd say what Eric said: start early, dig in, and figure out what are the first problems that you need to start solving for, and what are the ones that are going to take, as you said, Chris, quite some time to get across the finish line.
And I agree absolutely with my colleagues. To give you an example of this from Autlos, I actually joined as the company when there were 50 people before we'd actually dosed a single patient. And one of the early decisions we took was actually to help the NHS build their treatment delivery. And we needed to do that, of course, because we were running phase 1/2 studies. And we also then took the decision to actually run our commercial processes as much as we can during the pivotal phase 2 studies, because the devil is in the detail here, and you need to think a long time ahead, but you're also going to find that there is less of an infrastructure, I think, than people realize. So you have to build your infrastructure as you go. You know, you basically build the plane as you're taking off. So I think that's one thing. I have one more question for my co-panelists before we hand back to Janet. And we got about 2-3 minutes, so we're gonna have to be quite succinct about this. But the question, maybe for Alison first, what do you think we as an industry should do, though, to make it easier for people to gain access to cell and gene therapy? Is there anything that we should be doing collaboratively as opposed to independently?
You know, I think something that we're already doing, but I encourage us all to stay focused on it, is the work that we're doing with ARM from a policy standpoint. I think the things that are happening, for example, as was noted with the DRG, the things that are thinking about solving for best price, all of that, if we can solve those issues, and that's something that we should all be working on together, it's going to help all of us. It's going to help all the stakeholders that we work with. So I would put that up as number one.
Eric?
Yeah, and I'll be succinct because I completely agree. I think the policy front globally, I think, is key. And I think not only in the US, but outside. So as it comes to looking at whether patients are treated in an inpatient versus an outpatient setting, I mean, obviously that affects the financials considerably, but you know, for our patients, we don't want treatment decisions to be made as to whether or not the baby's in a NICU or not. So I'd love to see the policy landscape evolve considerably, and I think that's something we can engage on with Janet's leadership and together.
And I couldn't agree more. I think we have to look at the policy. And the other area, I think, curiously enough, is the other extreme, which is we're going to be many companies going to the centers of excellence, etc. Ideally, where we don't need to have a degree of differentiation, I think we will need to simplify some of the very basic aspects of delivery. I think the classic example is the work that's going on at the moment to standardize the freezing conditions, the work on the labeling for cell and gene therapy is
right.
Hard enough as it is. So I think, one of the things we should look to do is to work together to create a very positive environment for cell and gene therapy, particularly around reimbursement, but also avoid any unnecessary hurdles to its adoption. Janet, I'm seeing a lovely picture of your foot, but if you'd like then to maybe take over the next section of the meeting, I'll hand it back to you.
Sorry, I tried to have it show that my foot was not there, but my video was a little unstable there for a patch. Hey, thanks for that conversation. We definitely have more questions than we're gonna be able to get to, and you guys have addressed several of them. But let me pull out a few I think that we haven't really spent a lot of time talking about. There are a lot of kind of geography questions, and I think you guys have touched on various aspects of it, but maybe if you could just speak to Are there unique aspects of cell and gene therapy that determine whether you're going to launch in Europe versus the US? As you think about that decision, or even where in Europe to launch, what are the key factors driving those decisions, and are they unique to cell and gene? Chris, you want to start, since you've been moderating all this time?
Let's talk about, we talked already about the fact you have to even know within a country every individual center. So take away the detail that you need to be successful in this market. If you then start looking at a country level, you have various aspects of approval that are different in different countries. So one of them is the GMO regulations. Another one can be, for example, the standards on human serum if you use it. Another one can actually also be around the time it takes you to actually run clinical studies, the experience in the centers. So there are very big geographic differences that usually would tend to favor launching first in the US. It varies according to products, but every one of us has the aspiration to make our products available to all patients. So if I've got an ultra orphan indication, I may not open up every single country initially, but I'm certainly going to have a way of, I won't call it medical tourism, because at 2 years old, you don't have a, you don't go on holiday, but, I'm going to have a solution for patients wherever they rest. And the model will be different in different countries. And then I'll hand over to my colleagues to amplify some of the comments there.
Alison?
Yeah, so I think Chris said it well. I think unique for cell and gene therapy, he called out some of the critical things to think about. It's also, the link to your manufacturing for each individual patient. So a lot of what we had to do was think about just the logistics and what has to happen, and how we use fresh apheresis. So how make sure that we're apheresing a patient and can get it to the drug product manufacturing site within the window, make sure that happens. I think that we're also looking at, we don't call it medical tourism, we changed it because there can be weird connotations of that. We call it international care, but we certainly are well-versed in the cross-border reimbursement and what can happen and what can't happen, and how you can make that work. And also, just what the care network is for international care, because for a lot of these sites doing stem cell transplants, they have outreach and are already treating patients from other markets. And so understanding how that's going to happen before we get to launching Bluebird in every country that we want to be eventually. So there's a lot that goes on in terms of figuring out, patients who can be reached as you come to market initially, and then how to extend that going forward. But we're looking at, as I said, we look at cross-border, we look at international care, and then have a thoughtful plan for, starting in Europe, because the regulatory process there allowed us to move a bit quicker than we could do here at home. And so we took advantage of that for our first indication, but certainly working across all the markets in Europe and the US, and figuring out, where we go from here as we establish our foothold country by country and region by region.
Thank you. So I'll go quick because there's not a lot to add. I think it's been mostly covered. I think just a couple points to add. So we're agnostic, US and Europe. I mean, it's really, we're working hard in both, and whichever one goes sort of filing and approval quicker will be the first place that we launch, and we're preparing for both. I think there's obviously a lot of other markets, Brazil, for example, that's really showing a willingness to work on these type of therapies as well, some in the Middle East that we're also considering. Then the other dynamic I'll just add on is we're also seeing regional, and Alison, I like your term, but regional movement of patients within countries that have regional reimbursement systems. So Italy, for example, we believe that there may just be 1 or 2 treatment centers there, and that patients are going to have to come from other reimbursement regions to Milan or Rome, for example, to get treated.
I would, Janet, also add one important thing. Cross-border is also important. If you're going to be shipping products backwards and forwards, you have to be very au fait with customs regulation, GP release, so on and so forth. And that is really critical for cell and gene therapy if you're harvesting from the patient and going back to the patient.
Terrific. Gosh, questions are piling up, so I'll try. Maybe I'll just ask some of these questions to one of you in the hopes that we can get to more of them. One of the questions is really what's been the COVID impact on commercialization plans? And you know, one of the things I think that's been surprising to me is just the incredible pace of financing that's continued through kind of this pandemic period. We had a webinar with investors who I think foreshadowed a slight, you know, no one could foreshadow exactly what we're going through, but there's clearly been kind of a strong ongoing investment in this space and optimism about this space. But we know that regulators are slammed with COVID related work and that trials are also affected. Eric, I'll start with you on this, but from your perspective, how has COVID affected the next wave of commercial development for cell and gene therapies?
Yeah, I think if you think about being in the clinic, probably the biggest impact for us is that the patients are not able to visit the clinic for their normal check-in. So not on the dosing side, but in terms of our schedules on a 24 and 48 week follow-up. So patients that have fallen into that 24 week, we've had to find virtual ways to do that kind of follow-up. And then you really wind up, kind of ironically enough, it takes you right into the area of patient-reported outcomes because you're having to do some of those assessments virtually. So that's one of, I'll let the other panelists contribute as well, but that's probably one thing that's top of mind is patients not being able to come in for their check-ins.
Alison, do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I think, you know, one of the things we sat down and said, okay, how are we going to make things work while we're all sitting in our homes and not together and we can't go into hospitals and things like that. And I think flexibility has been a key point here. And, you know, what we've done is we've, you know, not only have we figured out how to work together sitting in our homes, but the team in Europe has done incredible jobs having virtual meetings with payors, with the government payer agencies, whether it's IFA or MNOG or whomever. You know, in one country, they said, no, we're not going to do a virtual meeting. And then they called the next week and said, when can we do our virtual meeting, right? And so getting the team set up and being able to execute like that, figure out a way, and it continues forward. With regards to, you know, treating patients, we, you know, each institution had to decide what they were going to do with regards to treating patients, because some sites were, you know, completely overwhelmed with COVID. Other ones were still wanting to see and treat patients. And so taking the lead from the institutions themselves in terms of what they wanted to do with regards to continuing clinical trials and moving forward with identifying patients for commercial product and all of that. So that's how we've handled it. Things, you know, we did have some bumps, but we're also finding a way through, which is really, really fun.
Thanks. There's a couple other questions about, we spoke earlier about some of the nuts and bolts, like a lot of this is just getting over little hurdles and working out specific things. So we have a couple of specific questions about working out these pay-per-performance agreements over, say, 5 years. And maybe I'll just collect a couple of different questions into one. There's some questions about how does revenue recognition work in a model like that? And also questions about the key players, like, for example, inside of US managed care organizations, you know, is the key player the chief medical officer, or does there also need to be a kind of different kind of conversation that involves more of the financial people in a managed care organization when you're trying to implement these kind of novel payments?
So I'll take maybe some of the European background to pay for performance, and then it would be very strange for me with my accent to be talking about US experience, and I actually have a US counterpart colleague who does this for me. I think what we should realize is pay for performance is not new. Examples of it include cancer treatments where, you know, if you're not effective after a certain period of time, you get a rebate. Another one of the early pay for performance programs was actually coming from HCV, where they actually in Italy took the viral load on a certain day. On the basis of the effectiveness of the product, you actually got, the health authority would actually get reimbursed. There are a number of challenges with them. One of the important things to know is what type of payer are you dealing with? Is it someone who's annualized budget? Is it someone who actually cares about the lifetime insurance of the patient? So someone like the NHS cares very much about the total costs of managing that patient. Someone who's got a private patient who's going to switch plan on them next week doesn't give a damn about that. They're very interested in the here and now. And so you may have to actually take different pay for performance approaches. What I would actually say is that, one, the law needs to be supportive of it. And clearly we mentioned earlier, there's a lot of work being done in the US to help. And the second thing is keep it simple. So if if people go down that route, the best thing is as a single marker, an early surrogate of outcome that you can actually reliably capture the patient for. 5 years is I respect why people would do that. It's possible to follow patients that long, but the longer you leave it to amortize, if you like, the payment, the more at risk you are of just losing the patient to follow up or keeping the motivation of the patient, particularly if they're cured. So that would be my advice. And then I'll hand over the atmosphere inside of payer halls in the US to my colleagues to answer.
Eric, would you like to start?
Sure. So just to tackle a couple of things, because there was a lot in there. So on the payer side, I will say our conversations, given where we are in our program and our launch timelines, are much more medical than business at this point. We're not talking about contracting. We feel we need to do education on gene therapy, disease, and our program first. And then secondly, I'll quickly talk about revenue recognition. So that, I mean, obviously it's going to be different for every company. I will say as a framework though, talk to your auditors early and often, as we talked about with the payers as well. And if you have outcomes that can easily be tied to what you demonstrated in the trial, I will say that that's a good way to start the accounting conversation.
Okay, Alison, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, I was just what Eric said about the rev rec. I think it's a really interesting question, but it's not one I can really give an answer to, because I think you know the counsel to talk to your auditors is exactly what I was going to say. So and you know each company and each outcome agreement, whatever it is going to have its own special considerations. And I am certainly not an accountant, so I'm not the person to answer that question. And with regards to who to talk to within a payer, you know, what Eric said in terms of talking to the medical people and making sure that the clinical data and the understanding of what your product is and the science of your product is first and foremost, but you will get to the point where you're spending a lot of time with the business people as well. So it depends on where you are. Get to know all those people within a payer, right? It's just like within an institution, get to know who the people are, how they work, who makes decisions, how that all happens. Get to know them early and be prepared for conversations and deep discussions on all the way around.
Got it. Hey, Chris, Eric, Alison, we've got, 35 questions piled up here, and we could spend the rest of the day answering them, but I want to be respectful of your time and the time of the people who have chosen to dial in and join us. So on behalf of ARM and the participants, I really want to thank you for your time today and for your thoughtful conversation. Chris, thanks for doing such a terrific job moderating. For those, we've gotten a bunch of really complimentary comments in the questions. I think people have found this to be really useful. And again, just to remind people, if you know somebody else who you think might like to watch, This webinar will be posted on the ARM website by tomorrow, and folks can find it there. So many thanks again to all of you, and we really appreciate your participation today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
All right. Be well.
Okay. Bye, everyone.